Yeah, they're stacking up, and I need to clean the shop up. It's getting to be a real mess, beginning to bother me a little bit. You know, it's what happens when you don't get out here for months. Sometimes, in this case, almost a year, where I haven't really been out here in a consistent way. You know. So this is the 285, and its boggle is as the fuel level drops, I can chase it with the screwdriver to keep it running. And it goes a little bit on the lean side, but it doesn't stall. You know what I'm saying? So if I chase it, even when it gets down towards the bottom, it still runs pretty good. But the carburetor settings are so rich that once I've stopped running it, stopped chasing it, and then fill it back up, it's so rich that it won't run. So my first instinct was like, tank vent, right? But the tank vent, usually what happens is it goes lean a lot faster. And you can't chase it. And as soon as you crack the fuel line or the fuel cap, you know, the pressure goes in there and runs again. So I'm thinking this is a fuel line. Got a hole in it somewhere. That's my guess. So we're going to start with that. Just give it a shot. If I can do that quickly, we'll go out and run it today and see if it works. You know, that's a big, heavy beast, but I like it. No practical value or reason at all, but I just happen to like the thing, you know, hanging onto a big old chunk of aluminum like that. Reminds me of, well, a simpler time and a time when I was in better condition. So, and then I've got this one that needs a bath badly. It's a 930, and its boggle, it has no spark, but it's got good compression. So we're just going to have to, it's probably going to take a couple of videos when I finally get to it, but go through and, you know, make sure we got good compression, which I believe it does. You know, carb kit, fuel lines, all the things related, even before I start solving its obvious problem, which is ignition. And I'm trying to remember, but one of these had, you know, Husqvarna style ignitions like you'd get on a, you know, 281, 288 saw. And I'm not sure if this is that or not, but my hunch is there's a little coil down there without pulling off the air filter. The air filter is still somewhat on there. And then it has power generation and trigger on the flywheel. So it's a little more complex, a little more kludgy ignition like some of the Huskies had. And so I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get it to run. Now, the 930 versus the 920, I've had a fair number of 920s on the channel. I've got like 2 or 3 of them that are running still. One of them's upstate. But they upgraded the air filter quite a bit on the 930. And the big difference, though, is kind of subtle and you won't see it. And that's at the base of the cylinder where the transfers are. They opened up the lower transfers on the 930 as compared to the 920. I'm not sure how to explain that. Now, I actually did that on the video, basically taking 920s and working the lower transfers to be like a 930, but also the case like a 930. And it made a big difference. It really did make a difference. So they were onto something. And if I understand the storyline correctly, the 920s came across and were a little bit doggy as compared to the 910s that were the precursor. And I believe Tilton, who was then the Jonsered distributor for the States, pretty much figured out what had to happen. And they went through and updated their 920s with that modification to the cylinder. Let me see if I can find a cylinder to try to point that out. You know, it's scary how much stuff I've got laying around. And here is one that's been modified by me. This was originally a 920. It had that broke off, which is very, very common because that was kind of delicate. It really doesn't hurt much at all. I mean, you lose very, very little cooling because of breakout. But you can see how they are one of the original designs that had a boot. This is one of those with a boot. That boot's thick. It's not going anywhere. I always worried about them, you know, breaking, but they don't go anywhere. But the difference between the 920 and 30 is right here, where basically they open that up a little bit on the 930s. And the 920s were a little different. I wish I had a stock 920 so you could see. If I go a little further with that, is the case actually bellies out there just a little bit. So after you can see it right there. You see that line right there? That's what I open them up to, and I really want to make them sing. It makes a difference. And that's going back to like what a 910 would be like. Yeah, that's a Walter mod. Die grinder mod. And at the time I was just copying what they had done on the 930s. So anyway, by the way, these pulse lines, I found out the hard way 12, 15 years ago that you need the one that can handle the heat, because it gets pretty hot in there underneath all those covers and stuff, and the air doesn't blow through enough to keep it cool. And if you use like a standard yellow line, they do melt. So anyway, that's a good cylinder. Maybe we should make it run someday. And here's a 920 where it has this style air filter. Oh yeah, see? It's got that little coil down there. My guess is that's what's not working on this 930. But you can see the difference between the air filters. That's 930, 920. And also, if you look here, this is a good sample of a 920. I got to put a seal on the oil pump side. Sucks a little air. Runs pretty good. You've actually seen this on the channel, this one right here. I used this saw before I put the big full wrap on it to cut down this massive maple once. And you can see on the cylinder where that got broke out. And that's a good cylinder. There's nothing wrong with it. So like I said, I got to start going through the pile of garbage I have and start sticking together a couple more saws just so I have something to run, you know, that's vintage. So these two will be a project later in the year just to get them running. I want to see if I can match my Homelite 540 in terms of, you know, ease of use. The Jonsered should have been a premium brand. So I would hope that the design features would allow that to perform as good as the Homelite 540. And same with this. This is a much earlier design, but it was a premium saw in its day. So there you go. Those are all going to be projects on the year. So while I'm prattling on about Jonsered Trivia, this Jonsered right here, let's see if I can get the light on it. Do you see how it's got the bar studs where there's a larger diameter threaded into the case, and then these are the standard Husqvarna diameter studs? Man, when you could find them, buy them. The 8mm, because what usually is on the Jonsered of this era, the big ones, are those larger ones. They're not quite steel diameter, and they're bigger than Husqvarna diameter. So you always have to find like a steel bar and adapt it down, or die grind the heck out of a Husqvarna bar to fit those bar studs. So there's details. So these things are pretty simple. If I need more access between, you know, the tank handle and the case top cover there, I can just drop a couple of these screws right there, take them out and rotate it down. But while I've got you here, look at this. There's your tank vent. So I may have to engineer something there to let more air in. And while we're looking, there's your fuel. There's your fuel line. Look how clean it is in that thing. Let me see if I can do this where there's not so much trash in the background. Just pull that darn thing right out of there. There it goes. Just had to be a little more persistent. Now let's see if we can see whether or not that fuel line was the problem. Much to my chagrin. This is what came out. That fuel line's still good. Well, there's nothing wrong with that fuel line. I'm going to set it right back in there, but I try to draw through this filter that's plugged. So it's the filter, not the fuel line, not the vent. So I put a little grease on that fuel line. Let me see if I can just pull it right through. That thing is tough. Whatever they use for plastic on that thing, it is tough. That's what my takeaway is. There it goes, pop right through. Now I got to come up with a fuel filter, because believe it or not, I don't have one. Well, I found a fuel filter out of an old junk pile saw. It seemed to not have a big deal with draw, so just test it, but I think it's all right. Yeah. So let's just stick it in there and see if it makes a difference running. See if my theory was correct. All right, what we're trying to do here, I just finished changing a fuel filter. Wasn't even a brand new one, it was just a decent one I had around. I've got to get myself a pack of filters. It's embarrassing they don't have a whole bunch of new ones. But I'm trying to get this saw right here, which is the 285 Husqvarna, to match user friendliness of that Homelite. That's tough to do, because that darn thing there is an easy starter and good easy power, doesn't vibrate a lot. Problem I have with the Homelite is parts are pretty much unavailable. I need things like this little cover here and a few other parts. I want to see if I can get the 880 handle, which is a little more rugged. But, you know, or find an 880 and just leave that one be. But this was supposed to be a premium saw in its time, and the bones are very good in terms of compression in seals and stuff like that, because we went through that. But what happens is I run it for a little bit, and then it kind of goes lean and stalls. And my first instinct was tank vent. The problem is it takes a long time for it to get there, so I went on to fuel line, pull it out. There's nothing wrong with the fuel line, but the fuel filter itself was plugged to the point where I couldn't hardly draw anything through it. So put the fuel filter in, got it fired up. We're going to bring it out here and run it. And if it starts going lean, that means I did not solve the problem. So that's the game. All right, we'll just set it up, see if it happens, what I need. Of course, what's the first thing a good saw's got to do? It's got to start. So we'll see if this one is a good saw. don't know if it's different in a positive way, but it's different. But if I gotta spend my time chasing it with a screwdriver, that means I have not succeeded. That should be the last tweak it needs. But, so let me see if I can get through some of this and flip it. out of bar oil either way, so I got to stop. But it's not running the way I want it to, but it sure cuts wood. It's not lacking for horsepower, that is a fact. But the characteristic that it has is, unless I load it, it burbles. And yeah, I could probably lean it out a little more. Maybe I will, just to see if that burble stops. But it could be simply the governor, that little ball bearing and spring might not be quite right. You know, because it feels a little bit on the lean side right till I get to the burble. And that's my fear with these carburetors, is you tune, trying to tune around the actual richeting system as a governor that it has. But when you get down to a certain RPM, it runs pretty well and really pulls hard. It needs a much more aggressive chain than what I have on here. You know, in terms of dropping the rakers or the guides, whatever you want to call them. But it needs to be much more aggressive. It'll be happier that way. Maybe that's just how it runs. I don't know. But I think the next step I'm going to do is, I'm pretty convinced that the fuel line is good. I'm pretty convinced that the top end cylinder, case seals and all that are fine. I don't think that's a problem. And that leaves spark plug, ignition, and the richeting device in the carburetor and the tank vent. Those are the three areas that I'll explore next. I'll put a different spark plug in it. I think I'm going to engineer a different tank vent. But the thing is that no matter what I do with the tank vent, I can't lean out the carburetor a whole lot more, so that is unrelated to the tank vent. So possibly the ignition has a problem where it breaks up on the higher RPMs. It could be that. But I have a hunch I'm just running into a design issue with the carburetor and the limiting device. I may just have to go epoxy it so it doesn't work and see if that solves my problem, gives me more RPMs. It's not lacking for power. You know, it's not lacking for power. All right, so I've come to some more conclusions. If it's a tank vent, it's not much of an issue because as that tank went on, I would release the gas cap and see if there was much change, and there wasn't enough to matter one way or the other. And it's leaned out just a little bit more, and I still get the burble on top, so it's not the tank vent, not the feed hose or fuel hose, not the filter, probably not the carburetor. So I'm down to some simple things. Could very simply be a spark plug. The reason why I say it might be a spark plug is as I was running it, it would get better. So it's better now than it was first tank. And all the things I was doing, tweaking and all that, I didn't have to do in the second tank. But it still started running better. I don't think it has to do with break-in and compression because I've had quite a bit of time on that saw. But it could have to do with if it was off before and it's an old spark plug, you know, maybe it's clearing the spark plug. So where I'm going to go with that is going to change the spark plug and see if that makes any difference at all. And not sure yet on the ignition. I can put an aftermarket ignition on that saw, but I don't know. We'll see. And but my instinct is, yeah, the spark plug is going to help, but it's not going to stop the burble. My instinct is what's making it burble is the richening device it has. That spring might be a little weak or something like that, where it's bleeding a little gas through there as the RPMs go up. Oh, one more thing. One of the side effects of all this goofing around with that saw is you may or may not have noticed that its fuel usage got a lot better. It's nowhere near the Homelite just yet, but it's gotten a lot better than it was when it was having a definite issue and I was trying to tune around it. Yeah, and the last comment is just like with the Homelite, because of the way it likes to run in the lower RPMs with a little bit less chain speed, I don't think I would ever fell a hard maple tree or ash tree using that saw with the technique that I use now. Because unless I had a really, really, not very aggressive chain, it would just bite and kick right back at me if I had that chain sharpened the way that saw likes to run. So the bore cutting's out. Conventional cut, yeah, all day long. But, you know, to me, chasing a tree down's one step away from stupid because you don't have to, you know. That's the whole idea of leaving hold wood and trigger wood. It doesn't matter if you use a Humboldt or a conventional or a bird mouth or some derivative of all three. Get the hinge right when you have the tree stable, well, reasonably stable. Get the hinge where you want it, bore cut where you think it's going to pull, and then nip it and let it go. You know, the last thing that crossed my mind is as I was walking up and out. Yeah, it may never run quite as nice as that thing does, or certainly not the modern saws, but it would be a hell of a stump saw. So maybe what I do now that I'm getting my strength back is take off that little wimpy bar and put on like a 30-inch or something like that. I've got a big old Canon roller tip, and then use that thing to take some of these stumps and bring them a little bit further down. Yeah, I don't know how to shut up, right? So the thing I'll have to do to modify this saw to do what I need it to do is, one, is get rid of that forward discharge in the muffler, because all that does is just blow crap around in my face. And modify a muffler. I'll see if I can find one that I can hack up and you know, blow the chips out the side. And I don't know if you were paying attention through the videos before. I ran that saw the other day, and it struck me that it does have the RPMs and the chain speed and the performance on top. That one can, in fact, has been a felling saw. So it's not like that style of cutting couldn't happen with a 1970s and 80s era saw, because I've done it with that one right there. Now that's a 61 Rancher, and on his tag it was made in the first year they produced him in 1978. Now I put a 272 top end on it, but I left the smaller carburetor, so it's not quite a 272 performance wise. And of course it has the old 2-coil ignition. And so it's kind of limited. That carb also somewhat limits it a little bit, but it has both the power and the power characteristics for me to be able to bore cut with that saw with a 28-inch bar, you know. And the reason why I probably wouldn't use that in production is because it doesn't have a chain brake. And I really like having a chain brake when I'm doing that kind of work. But power characteristics, Husqvarna knew how to make horsepower the right kind of way a long time ago. So that's a wrap. So yeah, I'm beginning to get a direction for that saw. Longer bar and muffler mod, so I can do stumps and stuff like that and not have it be a bit of a problem.